Hey yo, what's good everyone? Twisted here with Open Sorcery, and today I want to go ahead and talk about Lux, or shall I say L.V.X, as it's commonly referred to in Western magical occult circles, school societies, and what have you. Now, in that sort of sense, right, just talking generally about light, right, and how it can be utilized and the general principles of it, according to primarily Paul Foster Case, who is a renowned occult esoteric author and occultist who was more so prominent last century and was a part of several sorts of different orders, what have you, including, in regards to the particular text I'm going to be reading and reciting aloud, the BOTA, which stands for the Builders of the Aditum. Yes. And that right there, pretty much the Aditum that, is being built, as the name infers, is that the Sanctum Sanctorum, the Holy of Holies, pretty much, generally speaking, as is going to be discussed in the article, a consecrated place where one communes with God. And in this case, more so seen as, in the Abrahamic lens, the Judaic sort of lens, what have you, but can be applied, of course, to any individual of a priestly, spiritualist nature who, over time, throughout the eons and ages, has gone ahead and communed with, the heavenly divine in whatever sort of flavor or terminology or title, what have you, that you wish to place upon it. And, or the many different expressions, you could say from a polytheistic sense, or just a differentiation of religious background or cultural background that this is associated with. But I'm going to go ahead and recite this particular sort of article and kind of give a couple extra anecdotes of my own to add on to this as addendums, you could say. And it's a pretty short article and all that sort of thing, so my reciting of it and the extra points I have shouldn't necessarily be all too long and all of that sort of thing. But alas, let me go ahead and start it off. So, once again, this is from Paul Foster Case, an occultist and author, from the Paul Case Notebook, as it states on this particular page. It is a selected article of his, and it says it's from March 1960. And once again, it is on L.V.X, or Lux. L.V.X stands primarily for lux, the Latin noun for light. In the Western school of occultism, this word is often written with capital letters separated by periods to call attention to the values of the letters in the Roman system of numeration. L indicates 50, V stands for 5, and X is 10. Thus, the total value of the word is 65. This number represents the operation of the power symbolized by 5, as that power is expressed through the agency symbolized by 6. In occultism, 65 sums up the great work. It is the numerical sign of the manifestation of the power of the pentagram, 5, through the agency of the hexagram, 6. In practical occultism, the pentagram, or the 5-pointed star, is the sign of the Christos, the spiritual force of the I Am, seated in the heart of man. The hexagram, or the 6-pointed star, is a symbol of the cosmic forces surrounding man and constituting his environment. The pentagram is the sign of the mind's domination of the forces of nature. The 6-pointed star represents the cosmic forces and laws which make up the whole of the field of activity revolving around the central I Am. Thus, the number 65 expresses the occult truth that the Christos, 5, at the center of the temple of human personality, is actually in control of all natural forces. 6. The indwelling self is the ruler of the cosmic order. Hence, we find number 65 is the number of the Hebrew noun Adni, Adonai, Lord, a divine name which refers particularly to the one life power as ruler of the universe. The same number 65 is also the sum of the value of the letters in the Hebrew noun Hikl, Haikal, meaning temple or palace. In the Book of Formation, we are told that this place of holiness is located in the center, or in the midst, in the biblical temple symbolism, of which Freemasonry preserves some fragments. The midst is called the Sanctum Sanctorum, or Holy of Holies. This room had the dimensions of the perfect cube, and is related to the whole series of symbolic ideas expressed by the cube, which is shown on a seal of BOTA, which is, of course, builders of the Adytum, from which this article is derived from and originated from. In Solomon's temple, the Holy of Holies contained the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat on which rested the Shekinah, or radiant presence of God. Because our more esoteric work has a link of connection with these traditions, we use the conclusion, fraternally yours in L.V.X. at the end of all of our letters. By these words we acknowledge that all wisdom and power have their source in the one light, and by them we also testify that the one light is the one life. This one life, seated in the heart of man, is the true self, the one Lord, Adonai, enthroned within his holy temple. To the extension of that light, and to the manifestation of its power in the lives of men, our work is dedicated. May the full glory of that radiance be extended upon you. And there goes that reading. Once again, as I said, not all too long. But I did want to go ahead and touch upon a couple things in relation to this, right? So, in regards to the majority of it, and for the most part, the beginning and the mid part, I'm not really going to go ahead and touch all too much on it, what have you. But I will go ahead and say this. Actually, I will go ahead and mention something a little bit more so earlier on. In practical occultism, the pentagram, or the five-pointed star, is the sign of the Christos, the spiritual force of the I Am, seated in the heart of man. Now, in regards to the pentagram, I'm going to make a callback to a previous video put out for the Open Sorcery that was about the Venus star, or I believe the actual name of the video was a rose-shaped star. But it was talking about the Venus star point astrological event that was occurring at that time. I believe it was last October or November, approximately around then. But pretty much it was going ahead and speaking about the astrological event and other things that are associated with the star of Venus, and the general pattern of it, and other associations that I happen to pick up, not only myself but also Devi, in relation to those astrological events, but also just the star of Venus once again, and the nature of the Vitruvian Man of Da Vinci being related to the Venus star and of itself, and all of that. And I want to go ahead and state that in mentioning the Christos, right? So Christos, that being a Greco-Latinized terminology for, the christened one, which is associated and used very often when it comes to the title of Jesus Christ, which, if we were thinking more so like the original Hebrew name is more so like, most likely more so like Yeshua ben Yosef, being like, Joshua, Yeshua, son of Yosef or Joseph, the husband of the Mother Mary. Or, we can go with the Islamic name of Isa, or we can go with the title from the Old Testament of Emmanuel, but something that, Christ, Yeshua is called. I do not remember whether it's in the Old Testament or the New Testament. I believe more likely New Testament, but regardless, Christ himself is called the morning star and all that sort of thing. And talking about, being the light, the light bringer and all of that. which, also in that sort of sense, the Greco-Latinized terminology of Lucifer is also utilized in this sort of sense, right? And of course, it is up for you as the listener to disseminate whether, they are one and the same, if, and what have you, in terms of these two different figures, or if, they are separate and maybe there's a mistranslation or, what have you. Or, what the case may be. Like, one's the lighter aspect, one's the darker aspect, all that sort of thing. But, I wanted to go ahead and touch upon that in of itself of this golden light, right? This light in of itself, that, a lot of people envision as shining down from up above when doing different magical rites and rituals and all that sort of thing, right? As is stated within this article, it's associated with, like, the Abrahamic name of God of Adonai, A-D-N-I, and all of that. And that is one of the, names that's often used throughout the Old Testament. One of several names that, are a part of the Elohim. There's also a title of El. There's also Yahweh, or Jehovah, which is in of itself the Tetragrammaton, which I believe I'll go ahead and also discuss using one of these articles from Paul Foster Case as well at some point. But, generally speaking, right, this light in of itself, for those who are believers of the Abrahamic faiths or utilize magic and all of that within these particular systems, the golden light could be attributed to that. Once again, also could be attributed to Christ. Could potentially be attributed to this figure of Lucifer. For New Agers, they go ahead and call it the source. And, Gnostics, they go ahead and speak of the eminent light of the pleroma and all of these sorts of things. And of course, these are Western religious sort of examples. And of course, there are Eastern ones as well that I'm not necessarily recalling at the moment. But, obviously, quick Google search, quick, thumbing through some Eastern spiritual books, whether they're Westernized or more so core literature and all that. You can go ahead and dive into yourself to discern for yourselves in that sort of sense. But generally speaking, right, one of the core practices, or one of the core aspects of practices, I should say, within different actions of a spiritual nature in the, Western magical tradition, or just generally, is imagining light coming down from up above. Divine light, for cleansing, for healing, for empowering, for going ahead and charging oneself, getting rid of, negative energies, getting rid of negative entities, all these different sorts of things, right? Once again, there are many different things you could go ahead and attribute it to, depending on your background, depending on your perspective, and all that sort of thing. Whether you think it's Christ, whether you think it's the source, whether you think it's Pleroma, whether you think it's Lucifer, and of course, based on your own connotations of where this comes from, whether it is from a title that we associate towards these sorts of things, or something that has nameless, or we can't necessarily classify with our limited human language and comprehension. Whether it's good, bad, neutral, that is for you to decide, but I will say, in of itself, that it works. From my own experience, and from the experiences of those that I know, it generally happens to be of help and assistance, and going ahead and empowering you to go ahead and, once again, those stated purposes just a moment ago, for helping charge you, for helping rid yourself of negative sort of gunk and energies and crap and all sort of thing. And generally speaking, right, it can be a useful thing to call upon when you are in need. And with that, I'm kind of toying with the idea of going ahead and presenting a basic sort of, meditation, you could say, or just a practice of, having a golden light shine down from above. And, there's many different resources for that. And truth be told, I'm most likely going to go ahead and utilize one of Devi's works for that, whether it's Ritual and Essential Grimoire, which came out in 2022, or, another sort of work that explains something, like the same sort of process, but very similarly. There's many different, Western magical operations that utilize golden light and all that sort of thing, middle pillar sort of ritual, and, so on and so forth. But there's also more so simplistic, you could say basic bitch sort of ones out there, keeping it simple, stupid, as opposed to going through different sorts of ceremonial rites, what have you, because that's not my particular flavor at the present moment. But yes, also another thing I wanted to go ahead and talk about that was mentioned here, because I don't think I've necessarily talked about it all too much on the channel, if I have at all, which I may not have yet, but it is the Shekinah, and what have you. Now, for those who are unaware, the Shekinah in Judaism and in the Kabbalah is actually considered as the feminine principle and aspect of the Abrahamic God, what have you. Once again, whether you want to see it in a singular sort of sense and call it Yahweh or Jehovah as a catch-all, or, Adonai, or, think of it as El, what have you, the Elohim. And of course, the Elohim, for those who don't know, is a pluralistic term. When you actually go to the Hebrew roots of it, that denotes like a pantheon of gods and such. When you look at a historical lens, many different tribes and many different sorts of Semitic peoples happen to go ahead and have, these different gods and deities and entities, what have you. And of course, the origins of these, with quite a bit of evidence strongly to suggest that comes from Mesopotamia, so the Sumerian and Babylonian, and all these different sorts of cultures that existed in the Fertile Crescent. However, when it comes to the Shekinah, right, it is referred to in Judaism and the Hebrew tradition in Kabbalah as the feminine aspect of God, right? So what is the significance in relation to, I guess, the current state of existence, right? That would be, the Shekinah would kind of be like Mother Gaia, you could say, in a New Agey sort of sense, right? Or the Greco-Roman sense of where the term Gaia comes from. And that, when the fall of man occurred in the early stages of Genesis, as is documented in Torah, Old Testament, or the war in heaven, right? All these, the above, as above, so below, where there was a fall, there was a breaking, there was a splitting, there was a polarizing of things. The more so male aspect of God remained heavenly, right? To govern over things, to go ahead and see it, what have you. Whereas Shekinah, kind of willfully fell to the earthly plane to go ahead and be a placeholder of the consciousness of that, what have you, to maintain it. And you can see this as like the higher expression of this. And in Kabbalistic literature, I can't remember exactly what book it was that I was going ahead and reading this a couple years ago, and I first came across this term. It is a Kabbalistic book. At some point, I may go ahead and reference it if I happen to find it. But from my understanding of what some of the information I retained from the first few chapters that I checked of it, once again, there was that split of, God in of itself, the Heavenly Father, God the Father, and then you could say Shekinah is God the Mother, right? And going ahead and falling to the earthly realm, what have you. and then you could say as a sort of lower expression in the Kabbalistic sort of mythos and all of that. The fallen angel Samael and the demoness, was not necessarily an angel, but fell in their own regard, based on the origin story of the Adam and Lilith, which preceded Adam and Eve. They happened to fall, and that being a lower expression of this sort of divide and duality and all that sort of thing. And this is, pretty much what I recall, and that there was the higher falling, right, and then a reflection of a lower falling, and splitting and polarization of these different sorts of things. So, with that having been said, that's just another sort of thing that came to mind that I kind of wanted to go ahead and explain. Not necessarily the main point, what have you, but, I felt like it was worth giving some time at the moment to go ahead and express. And maybe I might go ahead and, at some point when discussing more so the divine feminine in of itself on a singular basis, going ahead and giving it its own time in the sun for more about Shekinah or mentioning it again. But to go ahead and come back to the original point, what have you, the golden light in of itself shining down from up above, and that, illuminating oneself with it, right? In terms of building, what is called the solar body, the rainbow body, pretty much going ahead and building up your aura, right? Using these different sorts of terms from whether it's the Eastern tradition or the Western magical tradition, what have you, and go ahead and crystallizing your aura to, once again, as stated in this article, perform great work, to immortalize yourself, you can say, to make it to where when your physical body dies, you'll be able to maintain who you are for the most part in terms of your mental, emotional, your astral bodies, your subtle bodies, causal bodies, your soul, your spirit, and keep those together for the most part. So you have a little, instead of just going into a trash compactor system of, you could say, the reincarnation cycle, or, anything like that, or being subject to the whims of these sorts of forces as the aspects of you are compartmentalized and chopped away at, you have more agency as to what it is that you wish to do in terms of if you want to incarnate or if you want to remain in the immaterial or higher dimensions, what have you, or wherever the hell else it is you want to go, and all of that. Yes, this is a useful tool for that sort of magnum opus, once again, which is like a Greco-Latinized term for great work, or, even for just day-to-day sort of stuff, I don't know, maybe you need to get rid of a headache, or, you're going ahead and you want to uplift yourself, or, whatever the case may be. It's a useful tool, and as I said before, I'm thinking of doing or presenting a basic golden light meditation for people to go ahead and utilize. But yeah, I just want to go ahead and recite the article and share some 2 cents that followed along with it, and have my original reading of it, recently, and, just it being a good summary of this term and this concept, this idea, and all of that. An addendum I wanted to tack on to the latter part of this that I forgot to mention in the original recording of this topic about the Lux and Light is utilizing the Kabbalistic tree of life as a framework, and understanding the separation when it comes to the Shekinah and of itself, right? So for that right there, initially speaking, in terms of the tree of life, what have you, before there was a fall of man or there was a war in heaven or any sort of dualism that was created. There was one tree, and it had the 10 or 11 spears, if you're counting the spear of Da'at, which was said to be more so full and realized, as opposed to its current interpretation and state, as you could say. In this sort of sense, right? The tree of life was more so full, but then came the split, then came the fall. And with that, the shells, you could say, there were shells, the outer layers of these spears, the Sephiroth, happened to go ahead and separate from what you can consider the cores are, which are the more so the Sephiroth that we are acquainted with nowadays in their current form and what have you. Now these shells, these husks, they went ahead and they descended. They fell and became what we know nowadays as the Qliphoth. Qliphoths, the tree of death, essentially. Where, in the Kabbalistic sort of sense, when you look at the different entities that are associated with each, the tree of life is associated with working with different sorts of archangels, whereas the tree of death is more so associated working with fallen angels and demons, as Kabbalah does not shy away from the darker aspect of things. And generally speaking, when it comes to the Shekinah and the fall and all that sort of thing, I guess utilizing a roadmap, what have you, Shekinah, as far as I'm aware, is within the sphere of Malkuth, once again, utilizing the Greco-Roman title of Gaia, to go ahead and make that correlation, as opposed to, say, Uranus, the sky god or sky masculine aspect, what have you, being more so within the realm of Keter, up at the top, from my comprehension of things, what have you. And then, with Samael and Lilith being more so of a lower representation of the fall and this sort of masculine feminine duality, being within the Qliphoth and the tree of death in of itself. So utilizing the tree of life and tree of death in the Kabbalistic tradition as a framework of potentially visualizing and comprehending it. In terms of the visuals, you can go ahead and look it up, across the internet or, within books, what have you. But I figured I'd go ahead and add that on as an additional means of comprehension for that. So, with all that said, this is Twisted with Open Sorcery, and stay frosty, Neguses. Peace.